House box placement. The house box needs to be at least 4 feet off the ground. The lines need to go through the underneath of it. All right, it's going to create a drip loop. It's going to let the water run off for it. For 6, we have a 5-inch diameter. For the RG11, it needs to be a 7-inch diameter. So when you put your fist in through it, you should not be able to touch either side of that. This needs to be at least 1 foot away from our other surfaces, and it needs to be level with both of them. This is going to create the perfect standard for the box, how it is sitting inside of the house box and how it should look. We have our POE filter, or as referred to, also a ground block. The ground block needs to be secured to the back of the house box. As long as the lines have an acceptable bend in it, the cable lines, then the splitter does not necessarily have to be attached. All connections have to be wrench tight, and they have to have outside fittings on them. No grommets are acceptable from satellite or any other dish. The connection points, as far as the ground tags go, they need to be tool tight as well. The jumper that we have coming from the POE filter to the splitter needs to be at least 8 to 10 inches. And the ground wire needs to run through the ground wire slot. It is specifically designed for that. Bonding and grounding. While we have multiple options available to us, not all of them are created equal. We see over here inter-system bonding termination, or that is also referred to as IBT. This you will see more than likely in newer subdivisions and new construction. Right? What this is it is a common grounding point for and location for multiple services on it. It always needs to be tool tight, and there has to be a ground tag in both of these locations. Right? If this is not available to you, then you're going to want to move on to your 6-wire, which will be coming out of the meter box itself, and you will use a split bolt on this. Right? The inter-bonding termination system prevents ground loops from occurring with these split bolts. If you see inside the meter box itself, you will notice that 6-wire is bonded directly to the meter. Now, it may not always be exposed. Sometimes this will actually go through the meter box itself. That does not mean if there is an IBT present that it is not bonded to it. If these two options are not available, if this is not exposed, that you can have access to it, then we move on to our meter clamps. We have our side clamp and we have our facing clamp. Once again, this one is your preferred option. If you install a face clamp, it is possible that if the electrical company or somebody else needs to have access to this, this may be removed and then not put back on. Cold water grounding. This is to be our last resort. It is very hard to verify. There are a lot of factors to consider, and this is why we try to stay away from it. But if all other factors and all other options have been discarded and cannot be found, then we go to the cold water. We have a typical diagram here of what a house is normally going to be structured as. We're going to have our water meter. It's going to be run into the house. The cold water pipe is going to be going through the ground, underneath into the crawl space, and into the house. It needs to be within it has to be in contact with the ground for at least 10 feet. Our service entry, this is where we're going to put our clamp. It's going to be when it comes out of the ground, inside the crawl space, that is where we're going to put our ground clamp. It has to be within 5 feet of that service entrance. So we have our pipe, we have our 10 feet within contact with the ground, and we have our clamp within 5 feet of the service entrance. A few other things that we need to take into consideration is, first of all, it has to be all copper. Okay, there can be no plastic or PVC. It has to be cold water. Right? These are things, and because of all these factors, it can make it difficult to make this a viable ground. 2 other things that we need to consider. First of all, we cannot ground on spigots. These do not go on spigots, and we cannot, for any reason, ground to gas. Underground installation and general craftsmanship. We're going to start with the conduit. The conduit has to be in contact with the ground and go all the way up to the house box itself. It has to be attached to the structure with the conduit clamp. All lines need to be coming underneath the house box once again, and if need be, or if required, they can be zip tied to the conduit itself. When it comes to the ground wire, we need to make sure that the ground wire is nice and neat. It needs to be attached to the structure. These clamps here are available in the warehouse for it. When the lines are coming down and going up into the hole, we need to have a 5-inch diameter, as always. They always need to come from underneath. They do not need to go from the side, and they cannot come from up above. This is going to allow water to continue to drip off and not run into the outlet itself. When it comes to going inside the house, We need to make sure that we have our feed-through bushing. Everything needs to be siliconed. Our screw clamps need to be a distance of 18 inches apart.